That's so crazy because I've obviously been thinking about this. I have students who are working on a project in a few of my classes that is Holocaust related. And so we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, leading to this week, leading to today, talking about this in class. And I'm always thinking about this stuff, right? It's something I've been doing for a really long time. I've spent quite a bit of time overseas going to these different places, you know, researching, educating myself in order to be able to educate others. I think talking about genocide in general is really uncomfortable for people. I have been shushed before. I have been asked to change the subject before because it is uncomfortable, because it taps into maybe like a feeling that we don't like to feel, right? You don't want to feel like you are on the verge of falling apart and weeping. And so I think sometimes people don't want to feel sadness. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. It's, I think, just human nature. It's difficult to talk about things that hurt, ripping off that band aid, right? And so I just, that's a big thing. I think, first off, it's just a difficult subject. And I think if people can avoid it, they do, right? It's not like there's a huge line all the time for people to take literature of the Holocaust or to take history of genocide and the Holocaust. I think there should be, right? But there is a decision that each person has to make. It has to be your personal decision that you want to engage this thing, that you want to feel uncomfortable, that you want to learn about these things that are so difficult. And I think the biggest reason is because history shows us that we tend to repeat these negative cycles, right? The cycle of destruction. That's not something that's foreign to us. I know that sometimes people have these reactions when something horrible happens in the world. It's like this, I'm so surprised that this could happen, right? In the modern world. I don't experience that kind of surprise anymore because I've been so deep into this study for so long that, sadly, unfortunately, when it happens to me, to the world, when I see it happening, um, while I'm horrified by it and while I feel it deeply, I can't say that it shocks me that people are still doing these things. Something happens, and then 50 years later, we decide, okay, well, it happened long enough ago that it's okay for us to not talk about it anymore, right? We don't have to talk about it as much. Why should it be required to talk about it in school? Why should we have to learn about it? If it's painful for us, it's going to be painful for our children. And I think that that's literally the answer. Never forget was something that was associated and is associated with the event of the Holocaust. Need Wieder, right? Never forget. And that idea is so important because when we do start to forget, when we give ourselves permission to forget, when we decide that it is okay to not talk about these things anymore, they are bound to continue to happen. This cycle will never be broken. Um, and it's that never forgetting part that is so crucial. We have to be willing to engage with the stories of the survivors and those who were murdered, right? We have to read their words. We have to listen to their words. We have to feel them. Um, They're a part of like humanity, this sacred thing. We're a community, and their suffering was and continues to be so real because trauma is a real thing, right? And even that trauma, it's passed down from one generation to the next. So these events affect the children of the survivors, right? It's not just the survivors or those who passed, it's their families who will take that, and it will pass down generationally. And so I think, I'm actually really happy that you're doing this. I don't know that I've ever been interviewed for this before, to be honest. And I wasn't expecting to see you, but I'm really like, thank you for taking the time to do this and for understanding that it is important. And I'll tell you what, when you talk about genocide, if you think about the word genocide, right? More often than not, the first thing that comes to mind for you is probably the Holocaust, right? And I think that that's common. And it's not because it's talked about too much. I think sometimes people are like, well, they kind of start to use weird words about it and its popularity and things like that. That's not it, right? The Holocaust, what happened, this thing that was simultaneously happening at the same time as World War II was going on, when that war came to an end and all of those camps were liberated and those, grave sites were located and these numbers started to be added up, right? This is the first time that you have the global community, the creation of the word genocide. Raphael Lemkin, right? He lost family members in the Holocaust. He had been thinking about how do we like describe this thing that we've seen before in the past, but it's continuing to happen. And you have like the coining of the term, you have the Nuremberg trials where you have these criminals who are put on trial before the world to have to like answer for these crimes, right? And so there is something really important about learning about the Holocaust because when you learn about the Holocaust, you learn about the stages of genocide. You can see the stages of genocide so clearly in the study of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. I think it really opens you up to so many other crimes against humanity. You start to see all of these other things, right? And so it's important to learn about genocide. It is important to learn about the Holocaust and all of these other events, genocides that are still happening today. Oh, yeah. Right? They're happening right now. And a lot of people don't know. And so I think as painful as it is to engage with the subject matter of genocide, it's so important. And I have to say, it's important in general, but your generation, I think, inspires a lot of us, right? And you all work so hard on these things that really matter, kindness, empathy, being a part of movements that really matter. And so I think it's really important for your generation to understand the importance of leaning into these difficult topics and almost like having a desire to engage in these subjects, to learn about them, to be able to better understand human behavior, why people do what they do, right? leads to these events even happening, right? Because I think you and your generation, like, I know this is super cliche or sounds super cliche, but I do think you're going to be world changers. But in order to really be able to change the world, you have to be okay with talking about all of the difficult things. What you're doing right now, that's a huge step, right? Because maybe like a year ago today, you would not have asked that question, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Or maybe even had this conversation, right? So you are personally experiencing growth. There are things that are happening in our country that have impacted you, that you are able to look at and say, like, geez, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at what is happening. This is something that is systemic. Like, we can look at it, and you are all now having this. I think what's happening is very organic for you, right?
Yes.
It's not this forced thing. It's that you've had these experiences. Maybe you even showed up to protests. Maybe you did something, but you're having these real experiences. You are in touch here, but also here in your heart, right? You're making those connections. And I think that that is what is kind of putting you in this place where you want to expand,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now you have this awareness that this is Holocaust Remembrance Week. There are events that are taking place this week, right? In our own community here in the East Bay, different webinars and Zoom things that are happening because they can't happen in real time, obviously, because we're in a global pandemic, but that hasn't stopped different institutions from hosting different, you know, seminars and workshops and whatever they can to get people to participate and to listen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think definitely becoming aware of what is available is huge. um, I already read so many different articles over the course of the week. I've watched, the video coverage of the survivors returning to Auschwitz, right? And so there are different things that you can read, watch, documentaries, right? Maybe this is a good week that if any other time you wouldn't necessarily set aside time to watch something about the Holocaust. There's so many good documentaries and movies about the Holocaust on like all the platforms, right? Pick one and watch it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe you watch it with a few friends via Zoom and then you can talk about it after. Um, yeah, there's just so many ways, and posting things in Schoology. I would really think it great for us to work on getting a speaker,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe setting something up. We still have survivors here in the Bay Area, and they are doing speaking engagements. And again, I just want to make it very clear, they're when they are sharing about their experience having survived the Holocaust, right? That experience is uniquely theirs, but I think it personally opens us up to thinking this is their unique experience of survival. How many others, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the other stories of this event? What are the other stories of other events? I recently have just been itching to learn more about where I grew up and their involvement in the Holocaust, right? Because I'm from Romania
Mm-hmm.
and my country. didn't just murder their Jews, they also murdered Roma gypsies, right? Romani. And so I've been, I purchased a few books and I've been reading just because it's really important to me to dig a little bit deeper, right? And digging a little bit deeper is my country.
Mhm.
And so there is stuff that can be done. And I think that it's such a big step for you to ask the question, what more can we do, right? Not so much is there more, but that there is more. So what can we do? Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. But if, you know, there's time to post, right? Something on Schoology, take a time to encourage students, take the time to like watch this video or read this article or to have an experience of talking to someone about it. It's such a heavy question,
Yeah.
right? Because when you think about the history of anti-Semitism, like anti-Semitism never goes away,
Mhm.
right? It just sometimes falls like dormant until it wakes up again. And for some communities, anti-Semitism never sleeps. Like that hatred is just always there.
Mhm.
Um, I know that the phrase is power, knowledge is power is really cliche, right?
Mhm.
Or at least it's become this thing. Like when I feel like sometimes when students hear it, you kind of just like, oh, you like don't want to hear it. But in terms of combating this thing and really like rising to like the call to do something that really matters, to be a part of a solution, right? I think knowledge comes first. You're not going to want to fight against injustice if you don't care,
Mhm.
if it's not your problem. I know people like that. I'm sure that you know people like that, right? Um, and in order for someone to understand that it is their problem, it's everybody's problem, right? It's all of our problem to want to end, this kind of behavior. Like it's all of our problem.
Yeah.
We are a part of a global community, right? But I think that we have to desire to be uncomfortable and to learn this stuff, to feel it, right? To understand the suffering that these people went through, continue to go through. It's not something that is just like in one place, right? We
Mhm.
keep repeating this horrific cycle. Um, and I think the root to that is not caring about learning about it, choosing to not be informed, right?
Yeah.
That you maybe grew up in a world that told you these aren't the important things. There are other things that are more important. Well, that's not true, right? Um, and so I think that education, learning like this, learning about this, engaging with people, understanding this cycle.
Mhm.
Um, it's the only way that people will truly believe that, like, wow, we have a problem and we need to break this cycle,
Mhm.
right? And so anti-Semitism is a real thing. It's something that is happening in our world today. There's been an increase, right? And so if we want to battle this thing, then we need to know what this thing is,
Mhm.
right? No doctor is going to try to cure something if they don't know what it is.
Mhm.
And once they know what it is, they can dig in and cure,
Right.
right? And so I think we have a responsibility to maybe have a bigger conversation, maybe have some conversations
Mhm.
about this. And I think it has to start with us, right? We have to be having these conversations. And then because we're having these conversations, then maybe from here, you come up with an idea of maybe you want to do something that's focused on some aspect of this, right? And you reach out to me and say, hey, do you have resources? Do you have this? And then we start to work together. I agree with you. There's room. Um, and my deepest desire is I want to be a part of the solution. And so I'm trying my best to get that information out there because I think we all want to change the world, right? We all want to see people care about people. We want kindness to prevail, love to prevail. That's what we say anyway, right? But if we really want that, we have to do the hard work. We have to do the heavy lifting. I do teach that elective course, but I also teach about the Holocaust in all of my classes.
Mhm.
I wish that we had more time in some of the classes to be able to dive in a little bit deeper. But I always tell them, like, obviously, we can't spend a lot of time in here if this is something that's interesting to you. There's genocide and Holocaust class where we like dive in, right?
Yeah.
But we do talk about the Holocaust, and I think for me, one of the greatest tools, resources, I don't know what to call it because I want to be really respectful and mindful of it because it's so precious, that I have been able to use to really help my students to connect,
Mhm.
right? To have some feelings about it, to understand that it's important, to understand that these were humans, not just, something that you read on half of a page in a textbook. It's not just something that you like move past really quickly. Is the use of diaries, reading diaries of people who survived, but also people who died,
Mhm.
and taking time to have the students read some of these excerpts of people who were their age, right? These
Mhm.
diaries that were found and they belonged to 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And you learn about these young people, right? That they went to school, that they loved to write, that they were artists, that they loved sports, that they were just exactly like you. They had their quirks, right? They had their arguments with their siblings and their parents. And then one day, the most horrifically unimaginable thing happened to them, and they had no choice in the matter. They went from being just an average kid in real life, their life being turned upside down, and then those young people being forced into making decisions about if they were going to eat that piece of bread or give it to their elderly grandmother. Those young people having to be in a situation where their parents had to make difficult decisions about a grandparent, right? unimaginable things, but these were real people. And so those journals, those diaries, they're really sacred, right? They're really special. And it, I think that they have been so important in helping students to like genuinely connect with these other humans. Um, and I think that that's a really important thing for me,
Mhm.
is being able to have access to that kind of material, and then having my students come back to me even years later and to be able to say, I've never forgotten that assignment where we read those diary entries. It still stays with me now. And I think that's really powerful because that started something, right? And so they're still thinking about those young people. They're still reading about the Holocaust, and they've grown so much and are aware of so many other things that are happening globally, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really powerful. Like having that, maybe it's just like that one moment where you like pick up that one primary source, right? And something happens, like something clicks. And you have that, oh my gosh moment of, they were my age. They liked the same things I liked. And they died, right? And I know that that sounds really rough and morbid and whatever else. And I don't mean it that way, but I think connection is really important.
Absolutely.
It's important to get anything done. And you having those experiences is equipping you to then be able to take what you experienced and to teach someone else, right? So it's not just about you learning, it's once you learn and you have that experience, you have a responsibility. You have to make a choice what you're going to do with that information, how you're going to get involved in the process of combating anti Semitism,
Mhm.
right? What's the next step you need to take? So it happens organically, right?
Mhm.
And then you teach others who maybe they don't know, but now you have this like new piece of knowledge that's so important. And you have an opportunity, you have access to social media, right? I would tell my students, I know you guys are on the social medias, right?
Yeah.
You know that this is today. Did you say anything about that? You have a following. You have an opportunity because you know. And I know that all of you use social media, right? So it's even something, I know to some people it might sound so silly. It's not, because you post something, someone's going to read it. I posted something earlier today during lunch and had reactions to it, right? People responded to it. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I remember when you went on this trip and you said this. Oh, all of these things. So it's like, how are you using the things that you have access to in order to be a part of a solution?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I love posting cute kittens and stuff, right? Like, I'm all about it, and cute videos and whatever. But I also know for me, like, I am a history teacher, but that's not it, right? I genuinely this is a life thing for me. And in this past year, I have to tell you, um, what I do in the classroom experienced a huge shift outside of the classroom because I had so many people reaching out to me. Hey, can we do a Zoom chat? I have questions for you about the Holocaust. Or I have questions. And you know what that was spurred up by? It was by what was happening with the BLM stuff here in the States. That got people thinking. And then they remembered that they had this one friend who did some work with something that had to do with human rights. And then they started reaching out, and I started having these really incredible teaching moments with not my students. And I felt like, this is amazing. Like, no one was shushing me, right? They weren't shushing me. They were saying, hey, Rox, I think I need to learn about this. Do you have some time? And honest to goodness, I didn't have time, but I made the time because it's important, right? It matters. I definitely think that this was really amazing getting to have this experience. You are the Harker community. You're a part of this community, right? And so am I. And so I think like this conversation has happened in our community today, right? That's huge. And I want to just like let you know that I'm available for this conversation, and I know that our student body is one that does care.
Yeah.
And so I want you all to always be looking for different opportunities to show that and to express that and to be a part of things that matter and to create things, right? To also be behind creating opportunities for people to be a part of. And so I think it's just really cool that we are here having this conversation today. I think that matters so much for our community. And I just want to encourage you and everyone else that while I know it's really difficult to lean into these conversations, I think that first off, they are necessary. And then we desire to do better in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is a really great thing, what we did here. And, I'm really hoping that I was supposed to take a group of students overseas last summer to go to some of these places. And it was going to be our first Holocaust tour, like learning trip. And obviously it was canceled because of the pandemic, but it's really amazing that students wanted to be a part of that. And so maybe somewhere down the road we'll be able to do that. And we have Mr. Perron's class, and we have this other genocide and Holocaust studies class. And again, it's tough to talk about, and there are a lot of other classes, right, where we talk about these things that matter. You have the ethics course that Mr. Janda is teaching this year, and a lot of other classes that are available where the core of these classes is talking about this stuff, right? And so I think people just need to shake off. I think young people, not just young people, that's a lie. I think you guys are better than some of the older folks, to be honest. But any of that feeling of like history doesn't matter,
Mm.
or it's not worth my time, or anything that like has fed into that lie,
Yeah.
you just got to like shake it off, right? It's nonsense, and it matters. All of it matters. It's why we are where we are now.